Now, folks, I'm not here to brag, but I was voted class clown of Willow Glen's class of 1994. 4 years later, that was still the only thing on my resume. I could have delivered it inside a fortune cookie at all the jobs I applied for. I was turned down 3 times at the coffee shop I loitered at in Campbell. You're just too social, Mike. That's what they would always say. If cafes voted for class clowns, I would have had my work cut out for me. I was lucky to surround myself with a massive crew of generous, lovely, hilarious people. One of my fellow layabouts dragged me to an open mic right here in downtown San Jose. They wanted to see me perform stand-up comedy in front of an audience for the first time. Little did I know that I would be the only comedian to sign up that night. The list was full of musicians and poets. Boring! But then the poets spoke, and I was mesmerized by their rhythms, their wordplay, their content, and most of all, their vulnerability. And yet, they were also very funny. They kept giving all they had. I was immediately hooked, and that open mic community became my home outside of home. I did everything I could to become a performance poet, a spoken word artist, a stand-up poet. Well, now, while I had always been drawn to comedy, I was also enamored by tragedy. My family has been through its fair share, and humor was all we could afford. We loved to laugh. As I began kindergarten, my mother married my stepfather, David Quirarte Ahumada. My brother and I were elated to have a dad in the house. But my grandmother disowned my mother because David is Mexican and she would never be grandma to my 3 wonderful sisters who would soon follow. But we would laugh without her and become the family my mother always wanted. By the time I got to high school, my parents had divorced and my mom could only afford a 1-bedroom motel apartment on the Alameda, 20 years before it had an art scene and a Whole Foods. The motel was supposed to be a pit stop, just until we got back on our feet. We lived there for 2.5 years. My mom made $320 a week, while our rent was $280 a week. My brother and I knew an allowance was out of the question, so we asked the motel manager for odd jobs. We cleaned apartments for $20 and picked up litter in the parking lot for $5 a bag. We lived in the weekly rentals, while the SJPD raided the nightly rentals once or twice a week. You haven't lived until you've heard a man trying to explain to the police why he doesn't know his wife's name. The only folks that regularly visited us were parole officers, missionaries, and community service workers. It was no secret that everyone living in those apartments were struggling. Neighbors helped each other when they could. Our leftovers went to the old couple across the way. Family downstairs would babysit when mom was at work while I was in school, or we watched their kids. Nothing went to waste. The day before Thanksgiving, 1991, a large box showed up at our doorstep, replete with a frozen turkey, boxed mashed potatoes, canned yams, canned green beans, canned cranberry sauce, powdered milk, and baby formula for my newest sister. My mom cried when she saw the box. I cried knowing what our struggle was doing to her. A month later, on Christmas morning, a large bag of wrapped presents appeared on our doorstep. Mostly generic toys and socks that we played with and wore until they didn't work anymore. I do not remember what I got for Christmas last year, but watching my giddy little sisters rip through a bag of presents from people we had never met tops the list of Christmases past. I can still see the look of astonishment on their faces after we explained that some very nice strangers wanted to make sure they had a good Christmas. Our motel manager, geniusly named Mike, was the kind of guy who let organizations like Sacred Heart know that his tenants needed food or assistance, that too many of us would be too proud to ask ourselves. Compassion does something to the flavor of food you didn't think you deserved. Being able to make rent and buy shoes for your kids because someone had a little extra and wanted to help is a present of presents. To be there for someone you don't know. When you believe that your lot in life is to go without, you are floored by the idea that there are people, not just one person, but that there are teams of people who are thinking about strangers and doing for them what my grandmother wouldn't. Strangers holding families together. I want to offer up some alternate words for stranger. How about human? How about fellow human? Future friend? Extended potential family? Community? Community encompasses those words and more. When you know without pause that there are people working every day to uphold community, that is a family. Be it a random group of kids loitering at a coffee shop, waiting there in the safety of numbers for some clue of who you will become, or a community of neighbors, protectors of the block who survive on the shared experience of waiting for the next paycheck? Family. Now, I'm not here to brag, but I was born with spina bifida. It's a neural tube defect that has impacted every single day of my life. As a disabled person growing up in Silicon Valley, I've always known that my life would have limits. My mother knew it before I did, so she would say, be whoever you want to be. Go wherever you can. Make them laugh with you. I knew I should be on stage, but when you believe your lot in life is to go without, by the time you're 22, you don't expect to go anywhere. Then a layabout friend hands you a microphone at a cafe, and you take it. Sacred Heart gives you a box of food and a bag of clothes when your check is smaller than you expected, and you take it, and you never forget it. A community of struggling poets keep feeding each other confidence, support, and actual food, and you take it. You win the National Poetry Slam Championship in a donated shirt. They hand you a trophy, and you take it. You are offered a spot to perform on HBO's Def Poetry Jam, and you take it because, hell yeah, you win the World Poetry Slam Championship, and for the next decade, you are handed thousands of tickets to tour your poetry throughout the US, Canada, and Europe, and you take them. You are given hundreds of couches to sleep on, and you take them, and you sleep horribly. But you are safe and warm in a city full of strangers you can't wait to meet. You travel 1,000,000 miles before coming home, and you take in every single mile before slowing down. You settle at home on 5th Street in Julian. You are offered a seat on the board of directors for Poetry Center San Jose, and you take it. A pandemic spreads, and you're met with struggle once again, like the rest of the world. But now you know that you have communities who will not let you falter. It's there if you need it. You're given a job teaching poetry to 4th, 5th, and 6th graders on the east side, and you take it because you know those families and those kids have sacred hearts too. Their tongues deserve real food and to be heard. They all deserve 1,000,000 miles. You are appointed Poet Laureate of Santa Clara County, and you take it and you run with it because it is an opportunity to be a bullhorn and a beacon. Now, I chose a life of poetry because I wanted to get rich fast. Folks, you can't spell poverty without poetry. All I have is my voice. And it's all I need to remind everyone that community begins with giving. Whether it's a meal, help with rent, a jacket from someone whose name I'll never know, or the solace in knowing that there are people in this room tonight who are here to ensure that communities will survive, which means that families and folks like me will thrive because you gave. Maybe I am here to brag, but it is to uplift those who deserve all the credit for supporting community by feeding, clothing, and educating our people and holding them together. Sacred Heart has held me together. Time and time again, all of my communities have pulled me together and lifted me up. I couldn't have lived the life I've had if I didn't know that my family, my communities, and Sacred Heart were there to let me become this poet. I may be the only person here tonight willing to admit that I am a poet, but I know there are some in here who have known the name of need, but not the name of the person who fulfilled it when least expected. When Sacred Heart Community Services gives you a microphone to speak about how important they are to you and your people, you take the honor and know that it is not enough. So for the rest of my life, I pledge to be a class clown Santa Claus poet, armed with dinner and a bag of toys for a house full of friends I just haven't met yet.